Hi everyone, I'm glad to see you all again. Outside today, even on this breezy day. I just thought it would be nice to be outside. So enjoying the beautiful parts of God's nature, the creation. I got a couple of texts from people and emails and things from people who were suggesting certain studies that we might do. And one of the studies kind of intrigued me, although it's a challenge. And someone suggested that we study something from the New Testament instead of from the Old Testament, and that we look at women in the New Testament that had interchanges or who met Jesus. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of fascinating, and I began to look at that a little bit, and it's going to be a challenge because some of these women are mentioned in different places throughout the New Testament, and of course, we know we have 4 Gospels in the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And some of them all recorded the incidents in different ways. Some, there was only an incident recorded in one gospel or maybe in 2. So we kind of have to skip around a little bit, which is different from starting at the beginning of a book and working our way through. It's kind of the way we did with Ruth or Esther. So, but I thought, well, this will be a good challenge. I started out with the easiest one I could think of because this story is only told in one gospel, in the Gospel of John. And the woman who had an interchange or an encounter with Jesus is the Samaritan woman at the well. So this is told in John chapter 4, verses 1 to 28. And it might take me a day or 2 to get through this, so I'm going to take some time with it. I'm going to start by, first thing I did was look about the Samaritans and what was up with the Samaritans. Why was this such an issue? So you have to think about the fact that the Samaritans were, geographically, think of the Dead Sea is in the southern part and the Sea of Galilee is up in the northern part. Judea and Jerusalem are down by the Dead Sea, and Galilee is up by the Sea of Galilee. And in the middle is Samaria. And when Jesus, in this chapter, is traveling, he's starting in Judea in the southern part, and he's going up to Galilee. So many Jews at that point would go around Samaria. They didn't like going through Samaria because Jews did not historically like the Samaritans. They considered them beneath them. But Jesus was different. He went right straight through Samaria and stopped at this well to talk to this woman. What's interesting to me about that is that historically the Samaritans were descendants of Joseph's sons. Remember, when the 12 tribes of Israel were established, 2 of Joseph's sons were the heads of 2 of the tribes, and that was Ephraim and Manasseh. And they were originally Jews. However, when the Assyrians came in, there was Assyrians that captured them and they went into captivity. They began intermarrying with the Assyrians. So what happened is, according to real Jews in Jerusalem or in Galilee, the Samaritans were kind of like half-breeds. I think of them like in Harry Potter when they talk about the Muggles, you know. They were half-breeds, meaning they were half Jew and half Gentile. And in that day, the Jews stayed away from them. They didn't want anything to do with these Samaritans, and they were different. And the other thing I read about Samaritans is that they formed then their own place to worship because they probably weren't very welcome in the temple in Jerusalem. They made their own place of worship. They made their own temple, and they made their own, they had their own traditions of how to worship. And they were just different in many ways from the Jews. So the Jews would have had no dealings with Samaritans if they could help it. And in fact, the Samaritans even had their own Torah. Now, the Torah is basically what the Jews had for their scriptures, and it would have consisted of basically the first 5 books of our Bible, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So those books would have been consistent with the Torah, basically. But the Samaritans, they formed their own Torah. They had their own, it must have been a little different from the Torah that the Jews used in the southern kingdom. And so they were not really apt to mix with one another. It was not typical for Jews and Samaritans to talk or to hang out together. In fact, when you think about it, a Jew would not talk to a Samaritan. A Jew would probably not even travel through Samaria if they could help it, if there was any other route that they could take. And a Jew would definitely not have talked to a woman in the middle of the day without her husband there. You know, I mean, there wouldn't really have, that would culturally would not probably have been the norm for a strange man to talk to a strange woman. It just probably wasn't done that much in that culture. So I'm going to read a little bit of John 4, starting with verse 1, and it'll tell a little bit about Jesus coming through Samaria. Jesus knew the Pharisees had heard that he was baptizing and making more disciples than John. Although Jesus himself did not baptize them, it was his disciples who did that. But he left Judea and returned to Galilee. He had to go through Samaria on the way. Eventually, he came to a Samaritan village of Sychar, near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from a long walk, sat wearily behind the well about noontime. Now that doesn't seem so important to us, but what seems important to me is the fact that it was Jacob's well, because of course Jacob had the 12 sons, the 10 sons, and then eventually those became part of the 12 tribes of Israel, and of course Joseph was his favorite. So this was Jacob's well, where he had established his land, and it was a pretty important place, really. The second thing is that Jesus is there at noon. Think about living in a hot climate, and you're a woman who has to go draw water. I saw this a lot in Haiti when I was there. It's a very hot climate, and people do not have water in their houses. They go to a spring and get water and carry it home. A lot of times the women will carry it on their head in big jugs. And when they did that, they never did it at noon because it was too hot. And because they had other things they were doing at that point, probably getting meals ready and so on and so forth. And in order to do all the things they needed to do, they went and got their water first thing in the morning. So I would say most women would have gone to the well early in the morning when it was cooler, when they could get the water for their daily routine of what they needed for cooking and cleaning and all the rest. And also it would have been a social thing for them, that women would have gathered there. It would have been a place where they could all kind of chit-chat. We're all there in the morning, kind of like all of us going to Panera's or Starbucks or something to meet our friends for a little chit-chat, you know. The women would have enjoyed that, probably, walking there together, being there together. So the fact that Jesus was there at noontime meant that there probably wasn't a lot of other people there drawing water. It would not have been typical for there to be a lot of women at the well at that time. So we're on verse 7. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink." He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. Importantly, first of all, he was alone. So we're talking about a single man talking to a single woman that are there together, and by single I just mean alone. And second of all, why is this woman there at noontime? You have to think, if you go somewhere that all the women go, and you go at a time that nobody else is there, and you go in the heat of the day, you're going there probably because you don't want to see a lot of people. So this is kind of a loner. We don't know why at this point. We don't know that she has kind of a checkered past. But we can tell already something's up because she's there at noon and she's there by herself. And this strange man that she's never met before is sitting by the well and asking her, "Please, could you give me a drink?" This is verse 9. The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. And she said to Jesus, "You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" You know, she's shocked. Prejudice alone would have ordinarily prevented this, let alone the cultural bans about men and women, fraternizing together. She's shocked. She says, you're a Jew. I'm a Samaritan. What are you asking me for? It shocks her. This would have been very surprising to someone at that time in that culture. Jesus replied, "If you only knew the gift God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me and I would give you living water." I just love how Jesus doesn't say right away who he is. He entices her with the idea of, You got to get some real water. I could give you living water. Of course, he already knows what's in her heart. He knows what she needs. He knows that she's spiritually thirsty. And he's enticing her with kind of a little suggestion of, hey, you know what? I got better water than this. I've got living water. And it does the trick. But first of all, she's concerned still with the practicalities. And she says, but sir, you don't have a rope or a bucket. She said, this well is very deep. Where would you get this living water? And besides, do you think you are greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and his animals enjoy? She asks a question that's very prophetic, and she doesn't even know that she's asking a prophetic question. Do you think you're better than Jacob? Yes. Yes, Jesus is better than Jacob. Yes, his well is better than Jacob's well. And Jacob was, of course, one of his ancestors, because Jacob had Joseph, and Joseph, da-da-da-da, down the line, and then we have David, and then eventually, of course, Jesus came from that line of descendants. So, you know, she's asking him this question, who do you think you are? Is basically what she's saying. Who do you think you are that you're better than this water? This is Jacob's water. This is really good water. Heritage, this is our heritage right here. And you're saying you have something better. Jesus replied, anyone who drinks this water will become thirsty again. But those who drink the water that I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. I just think that is such a statement, isn't it? Such a statement. A bubbling spring right inside you, you know, a spring of water. He's offering her something that is pretty remarkable. And as I said, since Jesus knows everybody and he knows your hearts, he knows that she is thirsty. Maybe she doesn't even know it. Maybe some of us don't even know it. When we have that emptiness inside us that only God can fill. People try to fill it with all kinds of things. They try to fill it with other people, with relationships, with drugs, with liquor, with TV, with books, you know. I mean, and those can all be good things. They can all be good things. But when you're using them in the wrong way to fill something that only God can fill, you're never going to be satisfied. You're always going to be thirsty again, looking for the next thing. I know someone that every time they got uncomfortable and just weren't happy with their lives, they bought a new house. I know someone that every time she gets down the dumps, she goes out shopping, buys some more clothes that she doesn't even need. She's got clothes in her closet with tags on them, you know. It's not doing it for her, you know. It's really not doing it for her, but she doesn't know where else to turn. And we all get that way sometimes, that we look in the wrong place for our spiritual refreshment, in a way. We look in the wrong place, looking for love in all the wrong places, kind of thing. And Jesus says, you know, I'm the only one that's going to give you the kind of water that's going to make you never thirst again. And it's always going to be a continual flow bubbling up from inside you, so you don't have to look outside, you look inside. And that's where you'll find this spiritual water, this living water to give you life. Such a great, great picture. I'm going to do a little bit more about living water next time. So stick with it. And if you want to read this is in John chapter 4, the story of the Samaritan woman at the well. So have a day where you're filled with living water.